The night was cold in Seoul. Officer Park Min-ho tapped his fingers on the steering wheel of the police car, looking at the empty streets. Next to him, Officer Lee Ta-sung yawned and checked his watch. It was almost midnight. "Nothing interesting ever happens in this rich area," Lee said, drinking his coffee. He was new to the force, just 6 months in. Park smiled. "That's because rich people don't cause trouble." He pointed at a man walking alone on the street. "Look at that one. He doesn't fit here." The man was Kim Do-young, wearing simple clothes, just black pants and a gray jacket. He walked quietly, hands in his pockets. The streetlights made shadows dance around him. "Let's check him out," Park said, starting the car. The police car moved slowly, following Do-young. Its headlights lit up the empty street. Do-young noticed the car, but kept walking. He didn't look back or run. He just walked normally, like someone going home after work. Park stopped the car. Both officers got out. Their boots made loud sounds on the quiet street. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" Park shouted. Do-young stopped and turned around slowly. His face was calm. "Good evening, officers. Is something wrong?" Lee walked closer, hand on his belt. "What are you doing here? This is a high-class area." "I'm walking home," Do-young said simply. "I live 3 blocks away." Park laughed. "You? Living here?" He looked at Do-young's simple clothes. "Show us your ID." Do-young reached for his pocket slowly. "Of course. But may I ask why you stopped me? I haven't done anything wrong." "We ask the questions here," Park said sharply. His voice got louder. "People like you don't belong in this neighborhood. You're suspicious." "People like me?" Do-young asked quietly. Something under his jacket gave off a faint blue light, but the officers didn't notice. "Don't talk back." Lee pushed Do-young against a wall. "You think you're smart." From her apartment window above, Song Jae-ah watched everything. She had been reading when she heard the shouting. Now she stood frozen, watching the scene below. "Officers," Do-young said calmly, "this is not right. I have done nothing wrong. I suggest you think carefully about what you're doing." Park grabbed Do-young's collar. "Are you threatening us?" His face was red with anger. "Lee, check his pockets. He's probably a thief." The blue light under Do-young's jacket got brighter. A small pendant hung from his neck, hidden under his clothes. It pulsed with energy, but Do-young stayed calm. Lee started searching Do-young's pockets roughly. "What's this light?" "Got some fancy stolen phone." "That would be unwise," Do-young said softly. His voice changed slightly, sounding deeper. "You still have a chance to stop this." Park slammed his fist into the wall next to Do-young's head. "Shut up. You don't tell us what to do." Above them, Jaya grabbed her phone. Her hands shook as she started recording. The streetlights began to flicker. "This is your final warning," Do-young said. The air around him felt different, like before a storm. "What happens next is your choice." The officers didn't listen. They were too angry, too sure of their power. They didn't notice how the shadows around them grew darker or how the temperature dropped suddenly. They didn't know they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. And they didn't realize that in just a few minutes they would be begging for mercy from the very man they thought was helpless. Officer Park's fist struck Do-young's face hard. The sound echoed in the empty street. Do-young didn't make a sound. He just looked at Park with calm eyes. "Not so tough now, are you?" Park said, hitting him again. Officer Lee held Do-young's arms behind his back, making sure he couldn't move. Above them, Song Jae-ah's hands trembled as she recorded everything on her phone. She wanted to call for help, but something made her wait. The air felt strange, like the calm before a storm. "I will ask one last time," Do-young said quietly. Blood ran down from his lip, but his voice stayed steady. "Release me and walk away. This is not a threat. It is a chance." Park laughed and looked at Lee. "Did you hear that? He's giving us a chance. Both officers laughed. The sound of their laughter bounced off the buildings. The pendant under Do Young's shirt glowed brighter. Blue light leaked through the fabric, but the officers were too busy with their abuse to notice. "What's the matter?" Lee taunted, twisting Do Young's arms harder. "No more brave words." Do Young closed his eyes. When he opened them again, Jaya gasped from her window. For a moment, his eyes had changed color. They glowed with the same blue light as his pendant. "Very well," Do Young said softly. "You have made your choice." Park grabbed Do Young's jacket. "The only one making choices here is us." He pulled back his fist again, but stopped. The temperature around them dropped suddenly. The street lights flickered wildly. Wind started to blow, but it wasn't natural wind. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "What's happening?" Lee asked, his voice shaking a little. His grip on Do Young's arms loosened. The pendant's light grew stronger, shining through Do Young's shirt like a small sun. Both officers stepped back, shielding their eyes. "I gave you a chance," Do Young said. His voice had changed. It seemed to come from everywhere, like the wind. "I showed patience. I offered peace." Park reached for his gun with shaking hands. "Stay back. This is your last warning." Do Young smiled sadly. "No, officers. This was your last warning." The blue light exploded outward, throwing both officers back. They hit the ground hard. When they looked up, they couldn't believe their eyes. Do Young stood where they had left him, but he was different now. His simple clothes glowed with strange patterns. The pendant floated in front of him, pulsing with energy. What are you?" Lee whispered, trying to crawl away. From her window, Jaya watched in amazement. The man below was transforming. The air around him shimmered with power. "I am the Guardian," Do Young said. His voice echoed with authority. "I walk among humans to judge their progress, to see if they are ready." Park fired his gun in panic. The bullet stopped in midair, inches from Do Young. It hung there for a moment, then fell to the ground with a small ping. "Please," Lee begged, his face white with fear. "We didn't know." "No," Do Young said. "You didn't know who I was. But that is not the point." He walked toward them slowly. Each step left glowing footprints on the ground. "The point is," he continued, "you didn't know who I was, and you chose cruelty. You chose to hurt someone you thought was helpless." The officers huddled together on the ground, their weapons forgotten. Above them, Jaya couldn't look away. She knew she was watching something that would change everything. The night had started with two corrupt officers thinking they could abuse their power. It would end with them learning just how wrong they were. Do Young stood before the trembling officers, his form radiating blue light. The street had become completely silent. Even the usual city sounds seemed to have stopped. "Rise," he commanded. His voice carried power, but remained calm. The officers stood up slowly, their legs shaking. From her window, Jaya noticed more lights appearing in the sky. They weren't stars or planes. They moved with purpose, drawing closer to the scene below. "What you see now," Do Young said, "is my true form. I am part of the Guardian Council. We watch over developing worlds." Park tried to speak, but his voice came out as a whisper. "Developing worlds." "Yes." Do Young raised his hand. Above them, the air shimmered and images appeared. They showed different planets, different civilizations. Earth is not alone. There are many worlds out there, all at different stages of growth. Lee stared at the images, his mouth open. Are you going to kill us?" The images disappeared. Do Young looked at them with sadness in his glowing eyes. "If I wanted to harm you, you would already be gone. That is not our way." The lights in the sky grew closer. They took shape, becoming figures similar to Do Young. They wore different colored robes, each glowing with their own light. One of them landed softly next to Do Young. She wore silver robes that seemed to flow like water. "Guardian Do Young," she said, We felt the disturbance. Han Suji, Du Young bowed slightly. Yes. I had to reveal myself. These officers needed to understand. Jaya couldn't believe what she was seeing. She wanted to run downstairs, to see everything closer, but she couldn't move. Her phone kept recording. Sujai looked at the officers with stern eyes. They attacked you. That is a serious offense. We didn't know. Park fell to his knees. Please, we're sorry. Your ignorance of my identity does not excuse your actions, Du Young said. Think carefully. Would it have been right to treat anyone the way you treated me? The officers looked at the ground, shame clear on their faces. Lee started crying quietly. For centuries, Sujay explained, we have watched Earth. We watch how humans treat each other. We see the good and the bad. Tonight, you showed us the worst of humanity. More guardians landed around them. The street now glowed with different colored lights. Each guardian watched the scene with serious eyes. Your actions tonight, Du Young continued, will affect more than just yourselves. Earth is being evaluated. We must decide if humans are ready to join the greater community of worlds. Park looked up, his face pale. What? What do you mean? There is a council, Suji said. They decide which worlds are ready for contact, which ones can be trusted with advanced knowledge. Tonight's events will be part of that decision. Do Young moved closer to the officers. His light was softer now, but still powerful. But perhaps this can also be a moment of change, a moment of learning. The other guardians murmured among themselves. Some nodded, others looked doubtful. Jaya finally found her courage. She ran from her apartment, down the stairs, and out onto the street. The guardians turned to look at her, but none stopped her. She had no idea that she was about to become part of something much bigger than herself, something that would change not just her life, but the future of Earth itself. Jia stood at the edge of the glowing circle of guardians. Her heart beat fast, but she wasn't afraid. She felt something else. Hope. Do Young noticed her presence and smiled gently. Come forward, Song Jia. You have witnessed everything. Your perspective matters. The officers watched with wide eyes as Jia walked closer. Suji moved aside to make space for her in the circle. These officers, Du Young said, looking at Park and Lee, must understand the weight of their actions, not just for themselves, but for all humanity. He raised his hands. The air around them changed. Suddenly, they weren't on the street anymore. They'd floated in what looked like space, surrounded by stars and distant worlds. This is real, Suju explained, seeing the amazement on their faces. We are showing you a small part of what exists beyond Earth. Park tried to speak, but no words came out. Lee grabbed his arm, trembling as they floated in the void. Look, Du Young commanded. Images appeared around them. They showed cities made of crystal, beings of pure light, and technologies beyond human understanding. These civilizations learned to grow past their hatred, Suji said. They learned to treat all beings with respect. That is why they are part of the greater community. Then the images changed. They showed darker scenes, worlds torn apart by war, planets destroyed by their own inhabitants' hatred and fear. And these, Du Young said sadly, are the worlds that failed. They let their darkness consume them. Jaya watched everything with tears in her eyes. We don't have to be like that, she said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. Speak, Suji encouraged. Share your thoughts. I saw what these officers did. Jaya continued, finding her courage. It was wrong. But I also seen good people. People who help others without asking anything in return. Do Young nodded. Yes, this is why we continue to watch and wait. Humanity has great potential for both good and evil. The space around them faded, and they were back on the street. But something had changed. The officers looked different, smaller, humbled. Please, Park said, his voice shaking. What can we do to make this right? That, Du Young said, is the right question to ask. Sujai stepped forward. Guardian Du Young, they attacked you. By our laws, they should face serious consequences. True, Du Young agreed. But perhaps there is a better way. A way that serves both justice and growth. The other guardians murmured among themselves again. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked uncertain. Tonight, Du Young announced, we will not seek punishment. Instead, we will create an opportunity for change. He turned to the officers, his light growing brighter. Your fate, and perhaps the fate of your world, will depend on what happens next. Jaya watched as the officers straightened up, ready to hear their judgment. She knew she was witnessing a moment that would change not just these two men, but possibly the entire world. The night wasn't over yet. The real test was about to begin. The street glowed with the combined light of all the guardians. Du Young stood in the center, his blue light shining brightest of all. He looked at Officers Park and Lee with serious eyes. Your judgment begins now, Du Young announced. His voice was firm but not angry. First, you must understand what your actions mean for Earth. Suji moved forward, her silver robes flowing like water. She held up a crystal that showed images of Earth's history. For thousands of years, we have watched humanity grow. We have seen great kindness and terrible cruelty. The crystal showed scenes from human history, wars and peace, hatred and love, destruction and creation. Park and Lee watched, unable to look away. Tonight, Du Young continued, you showed the worst side of humanity. You used your power to hurt someone simply because you could, because you thought no one would stop you. The other guardians moved closer, forming a tight circle around the officers. Each guardian's light created patterns on the ground, making a complex design. Please, Lee whispered, we understand now. We were wrong. Understanding is only the beginning, Suji said. She looked at Jaya, who still stood watching everything. This witness saw your actions. She chose to record them instead of looking away. That took courage. Jaya stepped forward. They were wrong, she said clearly. But maybe they can learn to be better. Du Young nodded slowly. Yes. That is the question we must answer. Can they learn? Can they change? And through them, can humanity show it is ready for more? The crystal in Suji's hands glowed brighter. It showed more images, this time of other worlds. Some were beautiful, filled with amazing buildings and happy beings. Others were dark and empty, destroyed by their own people's hatred. Earth stands at a crossroads, Du Young explained. Your actions tonight will help decide which path your world takes. Park fell to his knees again. Tell us what we must do. Please, we want to make this right. Sujai looked at Du Young. Guardian, what is your judgment? These officers have committed a serious crime against you. Du Young was quiet for a moment. The other guardians waited for his decision. Even the wind seemed to stop. Finally, he spoke. My judgment is this. You will not be punished in the way you fear. Instead, you will be given a task, a chance to prove that humans can change. Relief showed on the officers' faces, but Du Young wasn't finished. However, he continued, this task will not be easy. It will require you to face your own prejudices, to change not just yourselves, but to help others change too. Suja raised her eyebrows. You are being very merciful, Guardian Du Young. Not merciful, Du Young corrected. Hopeful. Sometimes the best way to fight darkness is not with punishment, but with a chance for light to grow. Jaya watched as the officers stood straighter, ready to hear their task. She knew that whatever came next would change not just these two men, but perhaps the future of Earth itself. The judgment was made. Now came the hard part, proving they deserved this chance. Du Young raised his hands, and the world around them changed. The street disappeared, replaced by a vast, empty space filled with stars. Officers Park and Lee floated in this space, their eyes wide with wonder and fear. Your lesson begins now, Du Young said. His voice echoed through the void. You must see what happens when hatred and prejudice go unchecked. Suji moved her hands, and images appeared around them. They showed a beautiful planet with tall crystal buildings and golden skies. The people there looked different from humans, but they walked and talked together peacefully. This was the world of Erics, Suji explained. They were like Earth once. They had different races, different beliefs. But look what happened next. The images changed. The crystal buildings fell. The golden sky turned black with smoke. People fought in the streets, hurting each other because they looked different or believed different things. Their hatred destroyed everything, Du Young said quietly. Their world died because they couldn't learn to accept each other. Park and Lee watched in silence. Tears floated from their eyes in the zero gravity. Jia floated nearby, watching everything with a mix of sadness and hope. Now see another world, Du Young continued. The images changed again. This time they showed a planet where people with wings lived alongside people with scales. They worked together, helped each other, respected their differences. This is Merith, Suji said. They faced the same challenges as Erics. But they chose a different path. They chose understanding over hatred. The officers watched as the people of Merith built amazing things together. Their cities floated in the clouds. Their technology helped everyone, not just a chosen few. The difference between these worlds wasn't their technology or their wealth, Du Young explained. It was their choices, each person's decision to be kind or cruel, to help or hurt, to understand or hate. Suddenly, they were back on Earth. But now they could see their planet as the Guardians saw it, a beautiful blue sphere wrapped in layers of possibility. Your world stands at the same crossroads, Suji said. And you, through your actions tonight, have shown why we hesitate to welcome Earth into the greater community. Park spoke up, his voice shaking but determined. We want to help change that. Please, tell us how. Do Young nodded. Your task will be to share what you've learned. Not by telling people about us. They wouldn't believe you anyway. But by changing how you treat others. By helping other officers understand that power means responsibility, not privilege. It won't be easy, Suji warned. Many will resist change. Some will mock you. Others will try to stop you. We understand, Lee said firmly. We're ready to try. Jaya stepped forward. I'll help them, she offered. I recorded everything. Maybe seeing their mistake can help prevent others from making the same one. Do Young smiled at her courage. Yes, you will all work together. Show others that change is possible. That hatred can be replaced with understanding. The night was almost over, but the real work was just beginning. The officers had seen the truth about their actions and their potential consequences. Now they had to prove they could turn that knowledge into positive change. The lesson was learned. The harder part would be putting it into practice. The first light of dawn appeared in the sky. Du Young looked at Officers Park and Lee with serious eyes. The time had come for them to make their final choice. You have seen the truth, Du Young said. You have learned about other worlds. Now you must decide your path forward. Sujai stepped forward, her silver robes glowing in the early morning light. The choice must be real. It must come from your hearts, not from fear. Park and Lee stood straighter. Their uniforms were dirty from the night's events, but their eyes showed new understanding. We want to help, Park said firmly. We want to make things right. Do Young nodded. Then hear your task. You will return to your duties as police officers, but your real work will be different now. You will watch for others who abuse their power, Suja explained. You will help stop them, guide them, teach them, but you cannot tell them about us. Lee looked confused. How can we teach them without telling them what we saw? Through actions, Du Young said. Through example. Show them a better way to use their authority. Help them understand that true strength comes from protecting, not hurting. Jaya, who had been quiet, spoke up. I can help too. I work at a news website. We can share stories about police officers who do good things. The other guardians murmured in approval. Suji smiled at Jaya. Yes, stories can change hearts. They can help people see the right path. But remember, Du Young warned, this task will not be easy. Some of your fellow officers will resist. They may turn against you. Park took a deep breath. We understand. We're ready. Are you certain? Suji asked. You can choose to forget this night. We can remove these memories, let you return to your old lives. Lee shook his head firmly. No. We need to remember. We need to change. Do Young's blue light grew brighter. Then your choice is made. From this day forward, you are more than police officers. You are agents of change. He touched their foreheads gently. A small blue light glowed briefly where his fingers touched. This mark is invisible to others, he explained, but it will remind you of your promise. It will help you stay strong when your task becomes difficult. What about Earth's evaluation? Jaya asked. Will this help? Suji nodded. Every positive change matters. Every person who chooses kindness over cruelty helps move your world closer to joining the greater community. The sun was rising now. The guardians began to fade, their lights growing dimmer. We will watch, Du Young said. We will see how you use this chance. The future of your world depends on small choices made by many people. Make yours count. As the guardians disappeared, Park, Lee, and Jaya looked at each other. They were different people now than they had been just hours ago. They had work to do. Important work. Work that would help change their world, one small action at a time. The choice was made. Now came the hard part. Living up to it. 6 months passed since that remarkable night. The police station looked the same, but inside, things had changed significantly. Officer Park sat at his desk, reviewing training materials. On his wall hung a new certificate, Excellence in Community Relations. Next to it was a newspaper article with the headline, Local Police Department Leads Way in Reform. Officer Lee walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He placed one on Park's desk. The new training program starts today, he said with a smile. 20 officers from other districts are coming to learn. Park nodded, touching his forehead where the invisible mark remained. Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed. Their department had become a model for others. Complaints against officers had dropped by 70%. Community trust had grown stronger. Other police stations wanted to know their secret. In her office at the news website, Jaya finished writing another article. Her series about positive changes in law enforcement had won several awards. More importantly, it had helped change how people saw police officers. She looked at the small blue crystal on her desk, a gift from Du Young before the guardians left. It glowed softly, reminding her that she wasn't dreaming. At the police academy, Park and Lee taught new recruits. They didn't talk about guardians or other worlds. Instead, they taught by example. They showed how power should protect, not hurt. Your badge isn't a weapon, Park told the recruits. It's a promise to help people. All people, no matter who they are. The changes spread slowly but steadily. Other officers noticed how Park and Lee treated people with respect. They saw how this approach made their jobs easier, safer, and more rewarding. One evening, as Park and Lee walked their patrol, they felt a familiar presence. Du Young stood in the shadows, watching. Guardian, they said together, bowing slightly. You have done well, Du Young said softly. Your actions have created ripples of change. Suji appeared beside him. Earth's evaluation has improved. Other cities are following your example. Small changes lead to bigger ones. Jaya arrived, having felt the Guardian's presence through her crystal. Will Earth join the greater community soon? Do Young smiled. That depends on many things. But thanks to you 3, humanity has moved closer to that goal. Keep teaching, Suji advised. Keep showing others the better path. Change happens one heart at a time. The Guardians faded away, leaving Park, Lee, and Jaya standing together in the evening light. They looked at each other, remembering that night 6 months ago that had changed everything. "Back to work?" Lee asked. Park nodded. "Back to work. There's still much to do." Jaya held up her camera. "I'll keep telling the stories that need to be told." They went their separate ways, each carrying the memory of that extraordinary night. They had learned that real power wasn't about force or fear. It was about helping others, protecting the weak, and standing up for what was right. The world hadn't changed completely, but it was changing, one small action at a time. And somewhere among the stars, the Guardians watched, seeing hope in every act of kindness, every moment of understanding, every step toward a better future. The story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning.